You did it! You're almost at the end of this week's lectures. I am sorry to report that Chief Fun Officer Smedley is down for the count and he is napping beside me. It's hard to see on that blanket, but he is actually snuggled up under there. So we're going to finish up talking a little bit about these different ways that we can utilize motivation, these different theories of motivation within the workplace context. So as we last saw with organizational behavior management, if you can engage in goal setting and figure out why, for example, injuries are not being prevented as well as they could be, at that point, you can institute an intervention, collect data to see how injury rates drop over that period of time. And what we've often will find is that if you can do this in a thoughtful, intentional way, this can actually modify behavior. So in this case, the interventions, I kind of whipped through it last time, so I'll just remind you how this worked. So in general, departments that had the highest injury rates were identified. This comprised about 250 employees. So they're looking for very specific behavioral targets. So safety behaviors that can increase health and reduce injury. That includes lifting safely from your knees, not from your back, wearing safety goggles, wearing appropriate shoes, and so on. And these were the things that the employees wanted or employers wanted to increase. The intervention in this case were having meetings about safety, so making very clear to employees, hey, these are our standards for safety, y'all need to follow them. Use of weekly posters so that people could actually see these, using reinforcement for good behavior, and goal setting. And generally, in this particular study, it was found that the goals were attained at over 90%. This was the lowest injury rate that had ever resulted from most hours worked, and workers actually really enjoyed having this information on hand. So in general, this is definitely a case where OBM is a bit of a win-win. Now let's talk about goal setting and management by objectives. I'm going to move myself down here for a minute. So one of the things that we tend to find is that goal setting can really boost performance. If you do not have a goal, it's going to be hard to achieve what you want if you don't have a goal. As we saw, if goals are sufficiently challenging and if they're specific, that can be a very strong motivator for behavior. So how might this work for businesses? Well, we can take a look at pizza delivery drivers. So, yes, Ninja Turtles. That's why I moved the window. So one of the things that we know is that if you are driving to deliver pizza, oftentimes you are expected to deliver that pizza within a certain time frame or there will be penalties. Now, because of this and because you have to get there quickly, one of the things that we find is that driver safety is not necessarily something that is considered. Generally, we tend to find that pizza delivery drivers have 3 times greater than the average accident rate. And this was reported by Ludwig and Geller in 1997 and 2000. So Ludwig and Geller in 1997 actually introduced a pizza delivery intervention. And there were 3 critical behaviors that were being observed for drivers at 3 different pizza delivery places. So they were looking at, are the drivers using their seatbelt? Are they using their turn signals? And are they engaging in a complete stop? And so each of these different stores were observed for 6 weeks as kind of a baseline measure of behavior. And then pizza deliverers were randomly assigned to one of 3 groups. The first group was what we call our participative goal group. In this case, they participated as a group and set goals as a group. So they had discussion-based meetings as a group. They would engage in participative goal setting. They worked as a group to develop goals, and they engaged in 4 different weeks of group feedback. Now, so participative goal, they decided the goals that they wanted to set for themselves. For our assigned goal group, the goals were assigned for them. So in this case, they had a lecture-based meeting, they were assigned a goal, and they got 4 weeks of group feedback. And then our control group has absolutely no intervention. Now, the question becomes, is a more participative goal? Is a goal that you set for yourself going to be more motivating than a goal that is assigned for you? And so let's take a look at the data and see what they find. So what tended to happen? I'm going to go ahead and move my head up here so you can read my graph. You can see this graph. So here we are looking at a particular targeted behavior. Now, what's kind of weird is that they mention these 3 different goals, but then they only really talk about the complete stops. So in particular, they kind of focused on the data of the percentage of complete stops. So as you can kind of see with baseline behavior, everybody's kind of around the same point. I'm not really thrilled that our participative goal group is a little bit higher than the other 2 groups here at the beginning. I'd like to see some error bars, as you know. And what you can kind of see, so we've got our circles for our participative goal group, we've got squares for our assigned group, and we've got triangles for our baseline group with no intervention. Now, during the intervention, what we actually kind of notice is that both the participative and assigned groups are engaging in more complete stopping. Our control group really isn't. In the withdrawal period, there is a bit of a drop, but we're still seeing greater complete stopping from our 2 goal-based groups. What's kind of interesting is that our participative goal group kind of returns back to normal after a follow-up. So this intervention seems to be pretty necessary. On the other hand, again, we kind of see our control and our assigned groups also dropping off. I find this drop-off from the withdrawal phase to follow-up, especially for the assigned group, particularly interesting. So what about the other 2 behaviors that were not selected? So here we have turn signal use. You can see that the participative group tends to be better at this, but it looks like, especially with this, we've got a 15% difference between our groups and from the get-go before the intervention ever happens. And that leads me to believe that these groups were already different to begin with. So we can't tell if it's the intervention that was the effect or the group that was the effect. And here is our safety belt use. These groups are totally different from the get-go. So we can't really tell if the intervention worked or if it's because these groups really are different. And as you can kind of see, they are. So I'm kind of curious as to whether these groups were actually entirely random or how big they were. Now, finally, we're going to talk about management by objectives and job crafting. So management by objectives has been used since the late 1950s, most famously by Peter Drucker, who was CEO for General Motors and General Electric. Management by objectives is basically setting objectives for your employees to achieve. So you use objectives and you have 2 important factors. First of all, you have some kind of system in place for establishing the goals you want to achieve, and you have a procedure for assessing performance. And there are 4 steps to this process. I would also mention that this is a cyclical process. It is a loop. You are never done. There are always ways that you could be looking to improve your performance. So here's how management by objectives works. Managers and subordinates will work together, so participatively, to set objectives over the specified period. The subordinates will then develop a particular action plan. The managers will conduct a performance review to see if those goals were achieved. The process has a temporary conclusion. If you've met those goals, awesome. Now it's time to set some new goals, and the cycle repeats. So then finally, we have job enrichment and job crafting. Both job enrichment and job crafting kind of take their cue from job characteristics theory. So the idea is that if you want to create more motivation in your employees, change some aspects of the job to actually make the job more motivating. So in this case, job enrichment can use the principles of job characteristics theory to basically make a job more motivating. So for example, Catanzaro in 1997 actually looked at this with the teaching of general psychology courses. In particular, they used the job characteristics model to boost the motivating factors for students, in particular using skill variety. So the idea is that if you're only lecturing to students, they're not necessarily going to find that particularly interesting. However, students might be more motivated to learn if you give them a variety of different things that they have to do. So Catanzaro identified using skill variety to enhance motivation in learning psychology in classes. Instructors can use things like debates. They can illustrate the significance of learning this material through highlighting the applications of these theories and these constructs to everyday life. And also, they encourage instructors to use a wide variety of assignments and teaching methods to help make learning these things much more motivating for students. And then finally, we have job crafting. This is the process through which employees can modify, customize, and craft their own jobs with respect to the different tasks they have to do, the different types of responsibilities they have, and different processes. These are typically things that you would do through job negotiation. As you can see, this was developed by Oldham and Hackman, who developed job characteristics theory. And the idea is you make the job more motivating by crafting it and working with your employer to basically create the kind of job you want that would be motivating for you. So adding more significance, adding more autonomy, increasing or decreasing feedback, and doing those things to make doing the job much more motivating. So, hey, you did it. We did it. We made it through the first week of lectures for IO Psych. Please don't forget that you have a homework assignment coming up, and I will see you next week to talk to you a little bit about job satisfaction. Bye.